Do the cloud. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Adult Education Today. We are going to be talking about affordable housing, which is an issue very important to the city of Claremont, but also to the surrounding areas. You're going to learn a little bit more about state funding and mandates that areas around us have to create more low and very low income housing. You'll hear about efforts in this city and surrounding communities to create affordable housing. And we're going to be led by two amazing members of our Board of Mission and Social Action. One is Bill Dodge, who is the writer of the editorial that you would have seen in this week's Staying Connected email. The second is Veronica Hernandez, who is a city planner and does a lot. She's had a great project on affordable housing, and she knows kind of the ins and outs of the pushback that people receive on issues like this and how to push things through. So really looking forward to hearing from both of them and creating conversation about what it means to have this as one of our mission focuses as a church, to create affordable housing around the Inland Empire and LA and Orange County, everywhere. So I'm going to turn it over first to Bill. Bill, take us away.
Jacob, thank you. And I just might, as a heads up, indicate I might be putting a mask on during this presentation because I'm actually in Washington, D.C. visiting with family. So still we're honoring the wearing a mask when we are getting together. But thank you and welcome to this discussion. As Jacob mentioned, I'm a member of BOMSA, the Board of Mission and Social Action. Veronica is also, and we have a number of other members from the congregation, some of which might be online. Ann Bennett, Jean Boutillier, Harry McCoy, Veronica, who I mentioned, Shirley Jones, and Jim Manley, and of course the wonderful Jacob, who serves on this group as well. Affordable housing is a new goal, I think, in some ways for BOMSA this year, and I suspect it'll be on our agenda for a number of years to come. I was thinking about the appropriateness of this on Palm Sunday, and I thought maybe it just is appropriate. I suspect those followers of Jesus were thinking at some point about where they were going to sleep for the night during their times with Jesus. And at times they probably even thought more about where am I going to be sleeping in the future? Where am I going to be living in the future? So we want to share a bit of information today about things that we could do individually and collectively, and then leave some time for your questions and ideas, because that's what we really want. And I'm going to ask you to think about two critical questions. One, why is affordable housing an important, maybe even critical topic for each of you to consider, and why should it be one for the church? And then secondly, what can we as non-housing experts actually do to advance affordable housing in all of our communities? And I understand, in thinking about Jacob's comment, that we have members of the congregation from over 50 different jurisdictions in the Inland Valley. So we can have an impact in a lot of places over the coming years. For me, the answer to the first question is kids. If you think of a family of, say, 2 adults and 2 children looking for housing in Los Angeles Basin, and also think about how much they are earning. If they are earning the federal minimum wage, each of the parents, which is only $7.25 an hour, there is absolutely no market rate housing available for them in the Los Angeles Basin. If they're making more, if they approach the $15 an hour, which is now the standard in Los Angeles County, there's still very little decent, well-maintained housing available for them. Now, some lucky families actually qualify for subsidies, and they receive subsidies and they can find housing to live in. And even more than normal are finding that right now because of COVID, because at the federal level, we've passed 2 massive funding programs, the CARES program and now the American Rescue Plan, both of which are providing support for people who cannot pay their rents, support for people who cannot make their housing payments. So it's a little bit better for some people now, but still there's a huge number of people living in substandard housing. It's just not well maintained, or they're doubling up with other families, or even worse, they're living in their cars or on the streets. Right now, there's 250,000 children in California who are unsheltered, and there's 17,000 children just in the LA school district who meet that qualification. So what runs through my mind is, what hope is there for the next generation if kids have to worry more about where they will sleep than how they will do on a math test the next day? Now, the answer to the second question is much more complicated. Building affordable housing is rocket science, as we used to say. We need all sorts of experts. We need engineers, we need architects, we need bankers, we need all sorts of programs to subsidize affordable housing, and that's just to build it. Then we need a whole group of people to maintain it, from managers to social service people to repair people to you name it. But we're not asking you or the church to become a housing expert. We're really trying to figure out what can we do that adds value to what the experts are already doing. And one of the key things is to find places to build affordable housing. Looking for empty lots, look for underutilized parking lots, looking for extra space that might be on a church or synagogue or mosque property, looking for, or a college property, and even in backyards as an option. And I think our timing is very good because right now is when each jurisdiction in the state has been given an assigned number of housing units to build over the next 8 years. And for Claremont, it has to build 1,700, but over 300 of them need to be low income, and another 550 need to be what's called very low income. So I think we can help find places to build those units. We can help talk to our neighbors and others to make them feel comfortable, and eventually the people living in affordable housing comfortable about living in our neighborhoods. And we can probably do some things to help raise some funds. So enough of me. Let me turn to the group of fellow members of BAMSA and Jacob to share a bit more information. And Veronica, let me start with you to share some information about what is the state of affordable housing in California.
Sure, thank you, Bill. And I'm going to touch on some of the points that you did as well. So let me share my screen. I have a PowerPoint. If you can't see it, that's okay. It'll be in the recording, and it's also just to help me focus my thoughts as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about affordable housing, some facts, where we're at, where we're going, how we got here. And then a little bit later, I'll talk about some of the solutions that we have, certain ideas and things that we can do to help meet the affordable housing demand in California. So where are we now? Affordable housing in California is obviously a very critical issue, as Bill laid out, a critical issue now, a critical issue for the future. And it's been an issue that, I work in city planning, as Jacob mentioned, so that's my day job. And we're always saying we have a housing shortage, we have a housing shortage. It's not just affordable housing the way that we traditionally think about it for lower income individuals or things like that. Everybody is struggling with housing right now. Middle class, middle income, if you even go up to Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, even people that we would look at their annual income and think that's a very high earner are struggling to find housing because of the housing market and everything. And COVID has complicated this a little bit with remote work and everything, but generally the housing shortage is not going anywhere. Most financial experts recommend that households spend a maximum 30% of their income on housing costs. There's nowhere in the United States where a minimum wage worker can afford a one-bedroom apartment working 40 hours a week. California is the worst offender in this regard. It has the highest rate of individuals in the country of households spending over 30% of their income on housing. 4 out of the 5 top most expensive housing markets in California, or in the country, are in California. And Los Angeles just barely misses that top 5 mark, but it's 7th in the nation in terms of being most expensive. 3 in 10 people in San Bernardino and Riverside counties spend over half of their monthly income on rent, and 1 in 3 people in Los Angeles County do the same. In total, California's housing shortage costs the state more than $140 billion per year in lost economic output, including construction investment and people just not buying things, goods and services, because you're spending over half your income on housing, over 30% of your income on housing. As Bill mentioned, California minimum wage is $13 an hour. In the LA area, certain areas, it's $15 an hour. The federal minimum wage, I believe, is 7 or 6, something lower like that.
7.25.
Thank you. In California, a minimum wage worker would have to work 90 hours a week to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles County. It's the same in Riverside, San Bernardino, pretty much 90 hours a week. And as I mentioned, even high earners can barely keep up with the housing costs in the more expensive areas of the state. In short, or in part because of this, California accounts for over 25% of the country's homeless population. We have the largest concentrated number of unhoused individuals in the nation. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think, oh, well, if you're homeless, you move to California because of the good weather and everything. And that's just simply not the case. The majority of unhoused people in Los Angeles County have lived in that county for over 10 years. They've lived there longer than a lot of the people who have moved here and can't afford housing. 75% of unhoused individuals had lived somewhere in Southern California before becoming homeless. So when you think about our unhoused neighbors, they really are our neighbors. They're people just like you and me, who, for any number of reasons, lost their home. They're Californians, their kids, their families, just like Bill mentioned. And because of the extreme shortage of housing and the affordability crisis, they've lost their home. We need to build roughly 3.5 million homes by 2025 in order to keep up with housing demand as well as anticipated population growth. As I mentioned, COVID has complicated this a little bit. There are more opportunities for remote work. We just don't have the figures right now, but roughly 3.5 million homes. And that is a lot of homes. I'm not going to go fully through the quotes and facts and figures and everything. But over 3.8 million families in California could not reliably pay their monthly expenses, mostly due to the state's housing shortage and exorbitant housing costs. That was in 2019. And I do just want to touch on, I know I mentioned COVID complicating things in terms of people being able to remote work, being able to move to more affordable housing options. The other thing that has maybe unfortunately balanced that out in terms of somewhat mitigating those affordability problems is that so many people, of course, have lost their jobs, have reduced income and things like that. So even though some people may be able to find a bit more affordable housing if they're able to work remotely or anything like that, a lot of people aren't right now. And the people who are working in those retail jobs, those food service jobs and everything, who have had to go in and are most disproportionately affected by this pandemic, of course, haven't been able to see those trade-offs the same way. Okay, so how did we get here? What's standing in our way? One of the things that has made it so difficult to build affordable housing and contributed to this housing crisis is what's called exclusionary zoning. This is a very fancy term that I love. Anytime someone brings up exclusionary zoning, I go, oh, I can talk about this. That is a very fancy term for you can't build that here. If you look at the historic downtowns and when you look at really well-planned neighborhoods, walkable, there's a mix, you can go to, your doctor's office over here, there's a retail store here, there's a duplex over here and a triplex and maybe a single family home, those kind of older neighborhoods. You can't build those kinds of neighborhoods in a lot of areas. these days, and that's not just in California, but California is a big offender because zoning laws and updates have over the years resulted in you can build your single family housing, your traditional houses here, and your offices go over here, and your industrial uses go over here. And everything is very separated. Everything is based on the use. And a lot of that has a very troubling history based in racial prejudice, wanting to keep multifamily housing, which is associated with, crime and people of color in the minds of so many people, including lawmakers. They want to keep that separate from single family housing, basically homeowners who in this country, a majority of them are white. So over the years, everything has become so segmented that, again, you can't build those kinds of neighborhoods anymore. And it's extremely difficult. It's burdensome to change those laws. It costs a lot of money. The people who have the means and the professional know-how to do that are often not interested in building affordable housing. They want to build market rate housing. They want to build luxury apartments and things like that. And so it's very, very difficult to get those changed. In addition to that, a lot of cities in California have burdensome development requirements, things like parking minimums. You have to have so many spaces per number of bedrooms. You have to have this much open space requirements if you're building multifamily housing. You have to be this far away from your property line, things like that. They, again, are really focused on the use. And the majority of zoning, I would say in California and in places that have it, are really focused on, okay, if you're building multifamily housing, you have to do this, this, and this. It doesn't matter where it's located. It doesn't matter if that makes sense for the neighborhood. It's just based on multifamily housing. Okay, you have to be 40 feet away from your front property line. If you're in the middle of downtown and you're 40 feet away from your property line, now you have this huge unused open space in front of your building. It doesn't make any sense. You could use that for something else, hopefully not parking. We want to get away from that. But again, those kinds of nitty-gritty requirements that don't really do anything, and they prevent you from building more housing. They prevent you from building something that's more livable, more walkable, and just really a more pleasant experience. Long approval processes, a lot of things get in the way of that. It can take years to build affordable housing. And that ties into those zoning requirements, development requirements, everything like that. And then, of course, as I lightly touched on, neighborhood opposition, systemic biases. People don't want that in our neighborhood, not in my backyard. There are a lot of stereotypes, again, about affordable housing, about just market rate apartments, about unhoused individuals. And that can be very difficult, especially because, in my experience, a lot of that can come from people who own homes in the neighborhood or property in the neighborhood. And as we all know, again, those individuals are higher income. Many of them are white. And so those people who own property will have more of a say with elected individuals, city council members, things like that. And you end up with a very small population who has a disproportional influence on what gets approved, what's allowed, etc. Where are we going? I just dropped a whole bunch of very disheartening figures and facts and light history and everything like that. The good news is that there are people working on this, and that's partly why we had this adult education hour. We really want to show what's possible. Unfortunately, SB 50 was a law that was introduced that was going to really streamline, or a bill that was introduced that was really going to streamline approvals for housing, get rid of a lot of really burdensome development requirements and things like that. It didn't pass last year, but I have a feeling that some version of it is going to come back. California legislators are really pushing a lot of these housing laws One of the ones that got tabled last year that's going to come back is Yes in God's Backyard. That would allow churches and faith-based institutions to build housing by right. None of those long approval processes, none of those burdensome development requirements on their property. And again, a lot of laws coming through, bills being introduced to streamline those housing approvals. We are also seeing every single year accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. The requirements for those are being relaxed every year. And the sum result of all of this is that we're making it easier to build those 3.5 million units. This is from a McKinsey report. I've got some of my figures from it as well on housing in California. California has room to build more than 5 million new units in housing hotspots. This only looked at Contra Costa County, Sacramento, and San Bernardino County. That's just 3 counties. It didn't even look at Los Angeles County, Riverside County, any of those other ones. And in those 3 counties, we can build more than 5 million new units based on, creative approaches, getting rid of those requirements, things like that. So the land is there. A lot of people think in California, the land isn't. It's there. We just have to have the will to do it. So I think with that, I'll pass it off back to Jacob. I have a few housing ideas and things that I've worked on my own time that I can talk about, but I think I've talked enough for a little bit. So I know you're going to come back to me. I will stop sharing my screen, and it's all you, Jacob.
Excellent. Thank you, Veronica. That was amazing. If you all don't know Veronica, you need to get to know her. She is incredible. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the church is doing right now. And first, having people like Veronica and Bill on our Board of Mission and Social Action is so vital, because we need this sort of expertise in the congregation, people who care about these issues and want to move us forward. And, thank you to Bill for bringing this up in the first place to be one of our focuses this year. And what's really hard about affordable housing is that it's not something to where, with hunger, we say, okay, we're going to give extra money to Inland Valley Hope Partners. We're going to open up a food pantry. It's just, this is a really complicated issue, and it's not going to be solved in a year, and there's not one solution to this. And so it's kind of hard to have these protracted, difficult conversations. It might burn people out. It might make them disillusioned. And so it's really important just to have dialogues like this, to continue the conversation, bring it up again and again and again. And so that's kind of going to be the goal of the Board of Mission Social Action. Let's just be part of the conversation. As individuals, we might not be able to do some task that's going to solve affordable housing, but at least we can be part of a wider community effort. And there are community efforts. So for example, just Claremont as one example, and again, this applies to all of our surrounding communities. There are groups in this city like Inclusive Claremont. A lot of our politicians, such as the city council members who didn't get elected, Mike Sarasco, if you know that name, Christine Margiotta, if you know that name, Zach Corser, these people are really passionate about affordable housing and are involved in local groups to try to push it forward. What Claremont United Church of Christ is doing on a very small scale is, if there is something that we can do on an individual level to help someone, we will do that. So if someone comes to Claremont United Church of Christ and is having a housing crisis, we will connect them to community resources. We have a list of what's available. It's really hard to navigate. It's important to keep that in mind. We think like, why can't they just call a number and go get housing? Most of these places have waiting lists. You have to be vetted. You have to go through a whole long process. So from the date of wanting housing to actually getting housing, it's really complicated. And so that's hard. Sometimes people come to us and say, hey, I met this person on the street. Can you get them set up with housing? And so wish that we could, but we can at least start the process. We have an emergency fund here at the church that has been very active during COVID, helping people who are facing issues with paying their rent. that's being funded right now by the Easter lilies that people are purchasing. A lot of that funding goes back into the Pastoral Emergency Fund. People give donations to this fund through the year, and we're able to use that to help people who are in acute crises. The city and other cities will have things like vouchers for hotels, or the church might put someone up in a hotel for a few days. But really, we need to talk about long-term solutions, because a lot of these are very short-term solutions. And we try to do that when we meet with people. If they come to us and want funding, before we give it to them, we'll say, hey, this is a short-term solution. We want to hear from you that you at least have some idea of what long-term steps you're going to be taking. Unfortunately, there are community groups like CHAP that are kind of defunct at the moment because of COVID, that are not able to do their full housing program because of having people in close proximity with each other. Something else we're doing is just with refugees and asylum seekers, giving rent supplements there. So if you all know the organization Claremont Canopy, which is, again, not focused in Claremont, but surrounding communities, helping with refugee resettlement. Our church regularly gives out monthly rent stipends to that community as they are attempting to find employment, et cetera. And so we have a dedicated account exclusively for use for that, as well as helping people right now who are transitioning out of Adelanto and other detention centers. We had a meeting with Judy Chu the other day, trying to just one main issue is trying to just shut down these private prisons, but that's going to mean a lot of people who will need housing. And our laws in this country don't make that easy. Thanks, Veronica, for mentioning the Yes in God's Backyard legislation. That's very exciting. We have kind of shared with the local community that while Claremont UCC doesn't have property that we're not using to build something on, we're here and ready to support any community effort. So if there is a faith congregation that identifies that opportunity, we will come alongside them and kind of rally the congregation with volunteer support, logistical support, financial support. So we're ready to move on that if need be. Yeah.
I was just going to say thank you for the sharing this information. And I wanted to give Veronica a chance to share some of the examples of the types of projects we might be able to work on. But also to mention that Jacob certainly lays out the fact that we have a base of activity to build upon as we look down the road in terms of what sort of opportunities we might have to provide housing in the future. And I'm glad you mentioned that we do have an expert in the congregation in the form of Veronica, who is truly qualifies as an expert, whereas most of us don't. She does. So Veronica, let me return to you and ask you to share some thoughts of the types of housing opportunities, housing projects that we could consider as we look at the future of our activities.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the kind words. I mentioned this earlier. I am a city planner. I'm a senior planner with the city of Riverside. So Bill is correct in that it's my profession, although I don't know if I'm an expert, but happy to share what I've worked on. So a few affordable housing ideas and things that we can work on. A really hot topic right now is accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. These have gone by many names in the past: granny flat, mother-in-law cottage, back house, second unit, guest house. They're all accessory dwelling units. These are often little houses that you build in your backyard. You can convert your garage. You can convert an unused area in the back of your house. There's lots of different options for things like accessory dwelling units. And this is a way for people to add on another housing unit on their property if they have the ability to. You don't have to add parking. So for example, if you convert your garage, you don't have to build a new garage or anything like that. And this is a way for, it's a really great housing resource for extended families, for young families, for seniors, younger people, and things like that, who maybe don't need as much space, but still, of course, need a place to live. California has made building accessory dwelling units much easier than it used to be in the past. It used to be restricted by the zoning requirements, those burdensome development standards that I touched on earlier. Over the years, laws have been just coming in just over and over. Sometimes as a planning official, it's a little frustrating because you're trying to keep up with it, but it's great. It's great overall. And so generally you don't need any special approvals. You just need a building permit. You can rent them out. You don't have to live on the property if you have an additional property that you own. Again, you don't have to build additional parking or anything like that. And you can get up to a pretty good size, about 1,200 square feet is the maximum for most areas in where you can in how big you can build this and everything. Accessory dwelling units, I think, are one of the most accessible, I guess, avenues towards providing additional housing units that people, just regular people can do. Some of the other things I'm going to touch on are things that obviously come from, developers and nonprofits and things like that. But an accessory dwelling unit is something that is in reach for, just individual people sometimes. So happy to touch more on those if people have questions about it. In terms of bigger developments, one thing that I worked on in the city of Riverside, this was a partnership with Habitat for Humanity, and this was Habitat for Humanity and the City of Riverside Housing Authority. This was a tiny home community, or Mulberry Village, basically, 10 units of transitional housing for unhoused individuals in the city of Riverside. They're about 400 square feet each, efficiency units, basically, living room, kitchen, bedroom. As you can see, there's very minimal parking. A lot of people, if you're doing the transitional housing, getting people who were unhoused and into housing, which again is the first step and a very crucial step towards providing employment, getting medical care, and things like that. So this was a little community of 10 homes again. There's single family houses to the north over here. There's a little bit of commercial down here. It's integrated really well into the community. It's not scary for neighbors to look at and go, oh my God, you're building 1,000,000 units. It's just 10 little homes that fit really well into the community. They did these little kind of craftsman inspired architecture. It hasn't been built yet. They run into some delays with COVID and everything, but they're getting back on track now. And again, this was a partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So once they actually go out and start building, it's going to take them basically a day to just throw these houses up. With the volunteer force and everything. So that's really great. They do have plans to release the architectural plans for this. So anybody can use these. These units would also be great if you have the plans to do an accessory dwelling unit in your backyard, something like that. And their hope is that this will become a model for other communities and other unused parcels to be able to do 5, 10, 25 units, however many you want. One of the other projects that I worked on, and this one would probably be of particular interest to all of us here, and I do apologize, the plans aren't very high resolution, but this is a St. Michael's housing development in the city of Riverside. So there is the existing Episcopalian church, so St. Michael's here, and they have basically all the rest of this right now is just parking lot and dirt, grass, everything like that. So they came in with a proposal to add a multifamily unit or multifamily building here, 50 units of affordable supportive transitional housing. So again, very low income families, as well as unhoused individuals who need a transition to getting back on their feet and everything. So that's 50 units that are going to be in this huge unused parking lot that they weren't using. this church is an older church in the city of Riverside, and the population or the number of people who were attending had declined over the years. So they really had this huge parcel that was being underutilized. And so doing a development that is kind of what people have in mind with that Yes in God's Backyard bill. Where they're taking a church that is maybe struggling right now and is not utilizing their property, and they're housing individuals from their neighborhood here, and bringing new life to this area, as well as again providing housing for people in the city. This is probably one of my favorite projects that I worked on. It was very controversial, but when it gets built, it's going to be a really great project, I think. And a really creative use of church land, that I hope that it can be duplicated in the future. Those are just the two examples that I worked on, and then of course ADUs as well. I have this here, and this is being recorded, so you can come back and look at it. The color. So I just wanted to touch on a few things that I really recommend for further reading. The Color of Law is a fantastic book. It talks a lot about some of the things that I talked about in terms of how we got here, redlining, segregation, the zoning requirements, and everything like that. I can't recommend it enough. Really great book. There was the McKinsey report on California's housing crisis that I referenced, as well as The Color of Wealth in Los Angeles, a study done by Duke University. Another paper, California Getting in Its Own Way, talking about those burdensome development requirements and everything like that. And then a group called Out of Reach California, which talks a lot about the minimum wage that I mentioned at the beginning. The minimum wage requirements, housing costs in California. You can look at it by county, you can look at it by city. It's a really great resource and tool that we have. So I just wanted to make sure that I touched on those real quick. I will hand it back to Bill. And of course, anything that I touched on, I threw a lot at you guys. Happy to answer any questions about it. But thank you.
Veronica, thank you. Let me share one thought that picks up on the idea that we do not have to do this alone, that we do have the opportunity of doing this collaboratively with other churches, synagogues, mosques, or other institutions, colleges, whatever. And Veronica and Jacob already talked on the Yes in God's Backyard as a piece of legislation, but it's also a national organization, and it has a chapter in Los Angeles, and that chapter has already helped a number of churches on putting together projects for them to pursue. I was also involved in another project when I lived in the Washington, D.C. area. I lived in Montgomery County, which is suburban Washington, D.C., and was involved in an effort called Action in Montgomery. And this was sort of a Saul Alinsky back of the yards approach to community organizing, where you get all these sort of institutions of the community together first, and then you decide jointly what you want to do with that sort of collective clout. And they got, I think, about 200 different organizations together, a lot of them faith-based, but also colleges, schools, you name it. And they decided jointly what they wanted to do was to raise some funding for affordable housing. And so for 3 years, we lobbied the county to set aside 3 cents of the property tax levy for affordable housing. That now generates enough money to literally finance thousands of units of affordable housing annually in Montgomery County. So it really points out that we don't have to do this alone. We can actually come together and find collaborative ways of doing things. And that was part of what I was thinking about when I put together the guest editorial in the Courier that talked about a program that could take place in Claremont or any community. I called it the Claremont Affordable Neighborhood Program for Claremont. But the whole idea of we don't have to do this alone, we can work with others. We want to turn to your questions now and give you some time for that. But I wanted to do one thing before I did that. This is the product of our granddaughter Miyako, who just delivered through her dad a piece of art that she put together for our presentation today. So I'll make sure I share this with Jacob and we can share it with the community. But it's her taking all the sort of words that we talk about in affordable housing and put them in a house. So maybe this can be our logo for future effort. But now it's open to you. And Jacob, can you just sort of recognize people and keep the dialogue going?
I know he had to hop off to
Oh, you did have
prepare
to
for
hop off.
the, yeah, prepare for
Okay.
the outdoor worship. So, if you have questions, I guess maybe raise your hand or chime in.
Yeah, sure, raise your hand.
Mel?
Um, I was interested, can churches buy property and qualify under this God's backyard proposal?
I'm not sure. I don't know if Bill, you know more about the particulars. I would think so. It's just church-owned land. In Riverside, because that bill hadn't gone into effect, we did it. We got a little creative with it. Basically, our zoning code allows for housing related to church use. So there was a church on the site, you can put housing there. I think when it was written, that was well, it allows for incidental housing. So the main use on that site is the church, so we allowed housing there. I believe they are revisiting certain aspects of the bill that was kind of tabled last year. And hopefully that's one of the questions that's answered, but that's a good question.
Yeah, and I think it's one we need to check on, Mel. I think the assumption has been, for the most part, that it was land the church already owned. So it becomes a question of, is there any restrictions on the church actually acquiring additional property for this purpose? I hope not.
Well, I'm at the risk of 2 bites of the apple, I'll say that I think there are people that are trying to leave legacy gifts, not just money or stocks or things, but maybe their homes. People have homes they loved or property they love, and they would like it to go to benefit the church and the community. And so if those kind of situations, I think, might be addressed.
Yeah, that's a great
Wonderful
idea.
idea. Yeah. Other questions or suggestions? That's a great one, Mel. Thank you.
This is Young-Soo Kim. I understand that we are talking about the long-term solution for the housing issues. And then I wonder whether if you have any knowledge about the CST after they move to Oregon. I see the dome. There is 3 units over, not the 3 the big units, north housing, west housing, and the other housing. So the 2 of them are they are all vacant. I wonder whether is there any things that we can have a temporary for those who are in need. I mean, as a temporary transitional homes. Is that something you can address to the city council? Or I feel so bad and laughing. I mean, watching all those deserted dormitories. So I just wanna share.
That's a wonderful creative idea. There has been, I must admit, I'm not the expert on the Claremont School of Theology property and whether that would be an option. But there have been situations where existing buildings have been used and converted into affordable housing. I think mostly with the idea it would be permanently affordable housing, but there might be the opportunity of doing something in the short term as well. So I think that's an incredibly creative idea that we could check into.
Please, I will be so glad if you can, yeah, if you raise, share the concern. Yeah, I really see.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I would agree that I'm not too familiar with that property, but I think that's a great idea, and I think that there's more willingness to look at solutions like that now after COVID kind of had people rethink what can we do in terms of temporary housing? Where can we put people? So we saw, hotels and things being repurposed for people who needed to quarantine or for homeless individuals and things like that. And so I like so much where these things were possible before, but people just didn't think to do it or didn't want to do it or put the effort into doing it. We're now seeing that, these kind of underutilized things can be used in really creative ways. And I think that's a great idea.
Mhm. Wonderful ideas. Others? Or questions?
Comments, concerns? Well, I think maybe if that's it, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Bill, for putting this together. I really can't commend Bill enough for bringing this up as something that we need to be thinking about, and really making it a focus, especially for bombs this year. Thank you guys all for coming. And if anybody has any questions that they think of or wants any more info or anything, I know Bill and I would be more than happy to talk housing forever.
Let me leave one thought with you,
Yes.
where the timing is especially, I think, appropriate. We're all receiving stimulus checks at this point in time. And I know many of the members of the congregation need those stimulus checks just for living expenses of one sort or the other. But some of us probably don't. And one of the thoughts that I would like to suggest is maybe setting aside that stimulus check for housing initiatives as BOMSA begins to make some plans and presses some or advances some ideas that we could give consideration to. Either hold on to the money yourself, or I'm sure Jacob would be happy to set up a fund at the church that becomes our sort of affordable housing fund in which we could put that stimulus check funding. So there is an opportunity right now to do something that could be supportive of affordable housing. But along with Veronica, let me just add my thanks. And we welcome your participation anytime in our activities, and we welcome any sort of ideas you might have for advancing affordable housing.
Thank you for your effort, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing the great ideas and then your commitment. I really appreciate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.